You also don't really need to close the door. You can kind of leave it. Hello everyone. Witajmy. Dobry den. Herzlich willkommen. Also auch mit dem Livestream. Ich spreche heute Abend Englisch und mit ukrainischen Untertiteln. Wenn ihr Fragen habt, dann ihr könnt natürlich in der Livestream-Chat eine Frage machen oder ja, später bei E-Mail oder etwas. Herzlich willkommen. Thank you very much everyone for coming. Welcome to this lecture, which will be the first of 3-part series of informal public lectures with the title The Horror in Us. My name is Richard Pedderfar. I am a critic and theorist from Australia based in Berlin. Tonight we will have a 1-hour lecture with translation support available in Ukrainian language. 15 minutes is planned for Q&A at the end of this, if it's necessary. This will be without any translation support and just in English. Welcome also to those joining via the live stream, hello, or time shifting this for watching later. I'm going to privilege the people in the room here tonight, mostly, so I won't really address you on the internet. But welcome, and please type your questions into the YouTube chat, and in the Q&A I'll get to them. I also, when we were testing before, we noticed there's a slight delay of about 20 seconds or something like this. Just to let you know that we won't be able to see your messages immediately. I have some introduction remarks first, which I'm going to keep as short as possible. First, some acknowledgements. Hanna Liashenko and my colleagues at Cultural Workers Studio, thank you very much for supporting me with this. Without you, I am just some dude. Also, Public and Private, the beautiful underground theatre space that we are in today, which is hosted by Jasna Winorovsky and Clement Lay. Thank you very much for the space today. This series of lectures is partly inspired by the context surrounding the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 in a cultural and philosophical sense. I am not from Ukraine, and I consider issues related to self-determination of Ukraine to be led by people that are from there. So today I offer some context points, some cultural commentary based on some observations from last 2.5 years especially, which I think can be intellectually supportive to this current context. So I am not telling a story about Ukraine to Ukraine. I am rather making an invitation for some theory to consider. The choice of the final girl as a theme relates directly to my conception of the full-scale invasion as a massive-scale patriarchal intervention that causes significant loss of control and autonomy for women, but not only, and hugely affects people's autonomy, decision-making, agency, and so on, and will for a long time.
Richard, can you update the text on the...
Thank you. This is part of my reason for re-invoking the final girl today, to reconsider her validity as a model for resourcefulness and assertiveness in the face of desperation. My first women-led project was a secret coven at the Cinema Studies Department of University of Melbourne. Many of the sources that I will use come from my former professors there, so I would like to pay tribute to them. Also the boyish enthusiasm of adjunct professor Angela Nadalianas, who first introduced me to the final girl, Dr. Wendy Haslam, and her fixation on Hitchcock, and Sage Walton for her demanding gender theory. I for sure blame them for the stuff about the male gaze and various feminist theorists that I will refer to tonight. Both blame them and thank them for the curse that they gave to me. For clarity, I don't consider myself a feminist. I don't label myself like this. My positions are anti-misogyny and anti-patriarchy. Here I will use a lot of feminist sources because I view that the situation calls for this. I consider these to be respectfully borrowed. I also don't refer to queer theory tonight, and even though I think they're cool, that's not my specialized area and also not my focus tonight. Having acknowledged these limitations, I otherwise request the right to speak here tonight in a free and crazy way. Please don't final girl me later. Okay, the format tonight and for the next 3 weeks is of a 1-hour lecture, which is interrupted by some incredible movie scenes. We'll be referring to filmmakers, showing excerpts from their great films for educational reasons. These will support the lecture. This will also be projected onto the back wall that you can see behind me and should also be fed into the live stream. So you'll see these clips as they come up. Everybody should be able to see this paper translated here into Ukrainian language, loosely translated, next to my beautiful face. The project will continue on, the projection is going to continue on the back wall with live translation using the CC button. Actually, I didn't do that, but you can try it if you want on the live stream, push the CC button and use auto-translate function of YouTube. And let's see if it would translate the clips, which are otherwise without translation. Actually, some of them are translated to Egyptian Arabic, and so hello to my Egyptian Arabic viewers. There is a total of 6 clips from various slasher films and 1 surprise at the end. Okay, let's watch some people get killed. So the slasher is a subgenre of horror film popular in 1970s and 80s and part of the 90s, mostly coming from United States. The subgenre is known for having a formulaic, predictable narrative and for featuring an often psychotic and often male-coded killer, and a series of murders happening one by one, normally of a group of friends or some other type of social group, such as family or meeting of some kind. Among other features such as low budget, exploitation aesthetics, overly graphic kill scenes and serialization. So I mean like multiple sequels. I think Friday the 13th is up to number 12, Halloween number 8, and Nightmare on Elm Street number 9, something like this. The slasher is also demarcated from conventional horror or other subgenres by its relative disinterest in historical themes of horror, such as macabre, supernatural, grotesque, death, and other suppressed or taboo themes. So there I mean like horror in literature or horror in mythology or other historical horror in drama, also other historical appearances of horror. Slasher film is a little bit different because it doesn't share these interests in supernatural, macabre, so on so much. Like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, yes, very macabre, there's certain specific examples, but basically slasher film is more interested in a obsessive fixation on sexual paranoia, and specifically the interplay between sex and violence. The slasher follows a basic A to Z plot with narrative climaxes marked by various murders. However, there is one survivor. The only character with the abilities necessary to defeat the killer is what Carol Clover in her 1992 book Men, Women and Chainsaws, Gender in the Modern Horror Film called the Final Girl, a hero victim who overcomes the horrific constant advances of the killer to finally overcome him. In the narrative of the slasher, the duel between the final girl and the killer often lasts a good 30 minutes of screen time, as she tries to outwit the killer's persistent, repetitive, and unversatile approaches, while noisily expressing her own pulsating fear in the form of a scream. While the slasher film begins in earnest with Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, 1964, one of the classics of the genre and the film that most accurately, I would say, but many theorists, adheres to the conventions of the slasher genre, is John Carpenter's Halloween, 1978. Occurring 4 years after what is acknowledged as the first Final Girl, which is Sally from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974, Halloween is both stylistically and in a narrative sense a quintessential slasher. Today, with its simple but catchy and effective soundtrack, which Carpenter composed himself, although not a composer, I believe, had no composition experience, but decided that it was a good idea to make his own soundtrack. It's also notable for the first performance of Jamie Lee Curtis, who would become an iconic superstar in Hollywood. And it's almost stupidly single-minded objectives. So it's a sort of dumb film in a way, like show the killer's psychotic backstory, show friends being happy, having sex sometimes, then kill the friends one by one, fight the final girl, stab the killer, killer gets up, detective shows up and shoot him, sorry. Don't shoot her. So in the famous closet scene, which we'll watch in a minute, towards the end of the film, the final girl, Laurie, hides in the closet, creating both a nice situation for the stylistic lighting and architecture, which is a feature of the design of the film, and an opportunity for her to show her skills in innovation as the killer slowly breaks down the barrier of the closet doors. We can see here already some of the traits of the slasher film which will repeat in the form of the final girl. So her resourcefulness, grabbing this coat hanger, to fight back in a situation where there is not so many resources around. Also, she picks up the knife of the killer, which is a common trope, that she actually uses the tool of the killer, specifically the knife, as a phallic reference that is like also a gendered icon. And also her intelligence, protectiveness of family figures. She's babysitting, in this case, is 2 kids, and her bravery in taking action. As well, we can see a few tropes that would be also made fun of in later films like Scary Movie, which is a parody of the slasher film in the year 2000, and also in self-referential jokes from, for example, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, 1997 to 2003, such as when the final girl enters the closet, instead of, so Laurie enters the closet instead of going for the balcony window, which is probably a better option. So some of these things come up in Scary Movie where it's like, I think there's a sign saying like, clear, safety, certain danger. And the character's like, oh no, what do I do? And then chooses certain danger. So some of these things are like jokes from the slasher film. Or yeah, when she drops the knife directly next to the killer, so she can easily pick it up when he mechanically recovers from his wounds. Clover describes the final girl, the female victim hero, in initially glowing ways relating to her emancipation and in particular her appropriation of what she terms masculine attributes, and combines these with her feminine ones into what is maybe the ultimate superhero able to draw from various gender signifiers at her own will. She writes of the final girl, she is the Girl Scout, the bookworm, the mechanic. She is watchful to the point of paranoia. Small signs of danger that her friends ignore, she registers. Above all, she is intelligent and resourceful in a pinch. Thus, Laurie, from Halloween, even at her most desperate, cornered in a closet, has the wit to grab a hanger from the rack and bend it into a weapon. Out of her friends or other group, she is selected early on in the film as having the necessary traits for survival. Quote, her smartness, gravity, competence in mechanical and other practical matters, and sexual reluctance set her apart from other girls. These are the qualities, including lack of sex, which we'll come back to in a minute, which allow her to, for Clover, survive the unsurvivable. Another classic of the slasher featuring the final girl is the Friday the 13th series, which began in 1980 and now on its 12th film. These films concern the backstory of Jason Voorhees, a character born with facial irregularities who almost drowned and then lives an isolated life growing up in the woods. He saw his mother get murdered by a camp counselor on in the first Friday the 13th, and now he enacts his revenge on anyone who returns to the fictional Camp Crystal Lake where the films are set, most of them. Actually, that's not true. Only a few of them are actually set on the lake. In Friday the 13th Part 2, which we'll watch now, a school camp is held at Camp Crystal Lake, and the kids are picked off one by one until the final showdown with Jason. The final girl's identity is set against her male counterparts, which are often either inept dudes with no idea what's going on, or figures of authority who attempt and often fail to intervene in the killer's mission and get a knife to the head or worse. Against these dudes, who Clover amusingly describes as would-be rescuers frequently blown away for their trouble, policemen, fathers, and sheriffs appear only long enough to demonstrate visible incomprehension and incompetence. The final girl looks an even more adequate candidate for inclusion into the symbolic order, which I'll return to later. While the final girl demonstrates her superiority over these dudes, she also has a mixed relationship with her female friends, especially in relation to sexual promiscuity. As Clover notes, in the slasher film, sexual transgressors of both sexes are scheduled for early destruction. Pretty much with the exception of Wes Craven's Scream, if you have sex in a slasher film, you're going to die. And the more transgressive the sex is, the worse the death. Post-coital death, says Clover, above all when the circumstances are illicit, is a staple of the genre. So the final girl's denial of sex is part of her survival strategy in the world of the slasher. Unlike her girlfriends, she is not sexually active, and says Clover, and does not seem to be even involved in that conversation. Because of this, the only really relevant male performing figures to her are the hollow, inhuman authorities, who occasionally frame events or intervene in the staged showdown with the killer. And Clover says, no male character of any stature lives to tell the tale. And then, of course, there is the killer himself. While the final girl may for Clover have characteristics of femininity and masculinity, the killer does the same trick in reverse, adopting feminine characteristics as part of his psychotic, murderous rampage. Clover explains that this point in a sort of strange or difficult way, that the killer, to quote her, the killer propelled by psychosexual fury, more particularly a male in gender distress, has proved a durable one. This image of a male in, quote, gender distress has proved a durable one. Or he is abnormally attached to family members, and specifically the mother. When faced with the horrors of patriarchy, then, the killer overproves himself, as Clover somewhat comedically puts it, and to quote her, the killer's phallic purpose as he thrusts his knife into the trembling bodies of young women is unmistakable. While the final girl then happily adopts the tools of patriarchy in order to hack her way out of the situation, the killer seems more limited by his own feminine side, so Clover suggests, to the point where she suggests that to the extent that the monster is constructed as feminine, the horror film thus expresses female desire only to show how monstrous it is. Again, I will return to these, some of these points about sex later. In The Final Girl, the categories masculine and feminine, quoting her, traditionally embodied in male and female, are collapsed into one and the same character. These allow her, the final girl, to mirror the psychological traits of the killer, who also displays, Clover claims, a certain femininity in his actions. This allows what Clover describes as a sort of level playing field of their final encounter where, and I quote her, the final girl looks for the killer, even tracking him to the forest hut or the underground labyrinth, and then at him. So looks for him and then at him, therewith bringing him, often for the first time, into our vision as viewer as well. She addresses the monster on his own terms. So we'll talk about this adoption of terms masculine, feminine in a moment. But first, let's watch a film from a clip from towards the end of the film Home Sweet Home, 1981. This is one of the few slashers directed by women. There are a couple, Nettie Pena, and we'll watch another one actually in a moment. Here, the killer Jay has entered the house of people celebrating Thanksgiving and starts attacking people basically for no reason. This is not the film that's very detailed with plot, actually. The motives of the killer are famously hard to understand, but that's not always important in the slasher film. So this is, in some ways, a good example of a standard slasher.
Sweetheart, do you want to just hold on and we'll just walk over here? It's okay. Let's go. Let's get out of here. Snap out of it. Come on. Come on. Stop! Stop! I'll get her! I'll get her! Now stay there! I'll be right back! Sweetheart, do you want to just hold on?
Yeah, poor guy. So again, you can see these themes recurring. So the killer rising up again after being stabbed, and like, you know, she takes the knife again, like this is the weapon of choice for the final girl. And this inept male figure who tries to be the protector but fails with this. This is a kind of repetitive story. But it is not only the control over the on-screen tools that ultimately gives the final girl her power, it is also her control over the camera and the type of forced identification with a female performing character for the mostly teenage male audience of the slasher film in the 1970s to 1990s. Clover's notes on how identification functions in the slasher film has a simple question in their heart. If it is so that all of us, quoting her, are by these processes made to identify with men against women, how are we then to explain the appeal of a largely male audience to a film genre that features a female victim hero? Here, Clover refers to a couple of points at the same time. First, that the cinematic apparatus as a conduit to what Laura Mulvey famously calls the male gaze in the 1970s, that the construction of viewing through film language is one that serves patriarchy through its mechanisms of coding. We'll look at this more next week. In summary, for Mulvey, it is not only the way that things are shot, but the entire cinematic apparatus, from production to labor rights to technology to the specific angles that are chosen. These are all generating patriarchal power, often at the expense of women, but again, not only women. So it's not only a matter of content, but means of production, systems of distribution, etc. However, Clover's twin focuses here in Men, Women and Chainsaws are first of all the audience, this predominantly male teenage audience, and second of all the camera's point of view. The cinematic gaze, she says, as we are told, is male, and just as that gaze knows how to fetishize the female form in pornography in a way that it does not know how to fetishize the male form, so it knows in horror how to track a woman ascending a staircase in a scary house and how to study her fact from an angle above her face, that should be, from an angle above as she first hears the killer's footfall. However, Clover later complicates this identification through the figure of the final girl, and I will kind of summarize now her complication. Firstly, there is a matter of what Clover calls cross-gender identification. As well as the rape revenge subgenre, the slasher is among the only films of this period to propose a female hero character. The camera on her may be a fetishistic one, but it is complicated by the final girl's own agency, which is signaled not just through her mastery of tools, but through her taking over of the camera's point of view through the film. This is best thought of as a struggle for the camera between the killer and the final girl. So the camera begins in identification more with the killer. I don't know if you're familiar with these shots, like voyeuristic shots through the bushes, stuff like this, of the victim. They often happen in the beginning of the slasher film, and then later the final girl takes over the camera and, for example, is like looking down on the killer's dead body, something like this. As Clover puts it, our closeness to him, to the killer, wanes as our closeness to the final girl waxes. As one goes down, the other goes up. A shift underwritten by storyline as well as camera position. Clover argues that this is not an accident, that the female exercise of scopic control results not in her annihilation, as it would in the classical cinema model. She points out, like, femme fatales sometimes take over the camera before they die in a film or something like this. So it's like female gaze is like able to capture the power of the film for a moment, but normally then is destroyed in classical cinema model. But in her triumph, indeed, her triumph depends on the assumption of that gaze. Secondly, as already mentioned, the feminine and masculine symbols being mixed in both characters, their performance of one or another gender within the binary becomes itself confused, to the point where the camera's fetishizing view of the final girl is itself a site of complication. Thirdly, there is the audience phenomenon of teenage boys cheering on the defense of the final girl against the killer. All of these are signs that a space is being opened up for potential exchange or fluidity of identification, one that proposes both an extreme conservative gender politics, punishing women for expressions of desire specifically, and a strict coding of symbols as masculine and feminine, obsessions with emotional performance of fear from the final girl, and a radical alternative at the same time that transgresses all of these ultra-conservative tropes. The contradiction of the slasher film is that it performs both of these gestures at the same time, violently enforcing these codes and at the same time subverting or complicating them. What relevance does this have today? When looking at contemporary media production, especially image production, we might observe its invisible contradictions, assuming authorship through self-production, yet seemingly desperate to fit into established codes of viewing, presumably gender fluid, and yet often insisting on a very gendered style of performance that is extremely conservative, assuming a baseline of transgression in gender, yet still gravitating to extremely banal figures like Trump, Putin, Elon Musk, exactly because they reinforce a pre-existing idea that does not threaten the established order. So I'm trying to suggest this split still exists, basically. The slasher film, through the figure of the final girl, may offer a space for disruption, but let's watch another clip before we complicate this a little bit. As I said before, part of the problem with any emancipatory argument for the slasher film is its insistence on what Laura Marvey calls a patriarchal apparatus, which includes production and also that most of the directors in slasher films were men. Home Sweet Home is a notable exception, but this next clip comes from the film A Night to Dismember, 1983, directed by the porn director Doris Wishman and starring the porn actor Samantha Fox in their only collaboration together. Wishman is an interesting filmmaker, yes, who had a long career in sexploitation in the 1960s and 70s. A Night to Remember is her only horror film, and she actually returns to making films, but specifically porn, in 1999 as an 89-year-old director, which is like crazy. So this Conan interview that I made a note about, you can see her, this TV show Late Night with Conan O'Brien, interviewing her. And look, it's an interesting interview, but it's interesting because it's so bad. Like, this is someone who has a long career in filmmaking and worked in this sexploitation industry, and then also made pornography and so on. And Conan, you know, she's 89 years old, she's still working, it's incredible. And Conan kind of treats her like a joke, like a novelty act, I guess because of stigma or nervousness or something like this. But it's a ridiculous interview. I chose not to show it today, but you can check it out online. But yeah, a good example of this stigma and how it functions. You will see some familiar tropes in A Night to Dismember, but also some intelligent mixing of them, as well as a sense of humor that is also in the film's title. It's a joke about the 1954 film A Night to Remember, A Night to Dismember. This is also a nice introduction to the slasher film in the sense that a lot of them were shot with almost no budget. A Night to Dismember is like $2,500 or something, feature film made for $2,500 in 1983. And had to use makeshift techniques and improvised techniques. However, you can also observe Fox taking really good care of her co-star in this clip. When she's axing him, she's really like gentle with him, which is like really interesting to watch. And because they're using a real axe, they can't afford a rubber axe, I guess, something like this. So she's like very gently axing her co-star. It's really nice. And also there's a strangely realistic performance of being choked that she gives. And this anti-US, look out for this anti-USA critique that Doris Wishman puts in the end of this clip.
Should have released you from that hospital.
I'll never go back.
Yes, I killed her. It was either Vicky or me, and I killed her. It took me 3 months to recover from Vicky's attack, but the fear and despair I saw mirrored in her eyes will live with me forever. Want a ride, lady? If you were wondering how I came upon all these intimate details, the Kent family had one thing in common. They all kept diaries. Yes, fingerprints proved that Mary Kent had committed all of the murders that Vicky had been accused of. Poor, innocent Vicky.
Yeah, did you get any of that plot actually? Huh? Hard to follow. Yeah. I should have explained a bit more. Like, you know, she gets killed because they think that she's the killer, right? So that dude is like kills her, but she wasn't the killer. It was this other, you know, person that you see in the end of the film who gets away with it. You know, so that's a really like interesting also reversal of the final girl trope. Because you have first like one person who is supposed to be the killer, but actually didn't do anything wrong and just was experiencing some mental illness, I think, in the film. And then the second one who was the killer who gets away. And then the guy in the film, ironically, becomes the killer. So it's like a really, you know, playing around with the agency of these different roles. And in a really clever way, you know, it's obviously a low budget film, reusing some shots sometimes in repetition, things like this. I think it's okay to, you know, not laugh at it, but just like, you know, laugh with it, I guess. Like, I think Doris has also said, like, it's not our perfect film. It was like, we're making this for $2,500 or something. But you can still appreciate what she's doing with some of the reversals, and that they're, I think, really successful examples of how the genre can be sort of used in a way that does actually advocate some sense of agency there. Okay, so I chose 2 slasher films today directed by women, but just to remind that these are not exemplary. Like these are 2 crazy examples. Most of the time, this is like a genre that's like really has male directors. Doris Wishman, for example, is a really exceptional figure, a really strange example of a human. The Inherent Patriarchy of the Apparatus, written about by Laura Mulvey in Visual Pleasure in Narrative Cinema, which male direction is one component of, leads Clover to completely take down her previous emancipatory potential of the final girl that she's arguing halfway through her chapter on it. And she describes this all as just a type of wish fulfillment, desire fulfillment for its teenage male audience. I quote her, "The final girl is apparently female, not despite the maleness of the audience, but precisely because of it. The discourse is wholly masculine, and female figures in it only insofar as they read some aspect of the male experience. To applaud the final girl as a feminist development, as some reviews of film Aliens 1981 have done with Ripley, is, in light of her figurative meaning, a particularly grotesque expression of wishful thinking. She is simply an agreed upon fiction, and the male viewer's use of her as a vehicle for his own sadomasochistic fantasies is an act of perhaps timeless dishonesty." This is like a very blistering critique, a very heavy critique in a way of her own arguments about the emancipatory possibilities of the final girl. And it's also an interesting about-face during the chapter, which might lead us to dismissing her claims altogether. Something like, well, the emancipation of the final girl was just a dream, so this is a complete waste of time. But there are a few features of the chapter that are worth zooming in on. I'll do that now. First, Clover makes this claim in the middle of the chapter before later returning to both championing the final girl's capturing of the camera lens and the slasher film's mixing of feminine and masculine characteristics in general. Quote, "It is not that these films show us gender and sex in free variation. It is that they fix on the irregular combinations," she calls it, "of which the combination masculine-feminine repeatedly prevails over the combination feminine-male." That one is a frustrating sentence to read, but I think it's deliberately confusing. Like, the emancipatory power of the slasher film relies on us deeply entering its world of confused gender coding and refusing easy answers that it must necessarily offer in order to be accepted within the symbolic order. In other words, the chaos and disruption caused by the recoding of gender roles are exactly what is unacceptable about it, in a social sense, and exactly what would need to be accepted in order to successfully subvert the patriarchal apparatus, if this was actually possible, which would only happen through complete patriarchal overthrow through revolutionary figures like Doris Wishman, I think. Clover's own skepticism, readable even in her most excited moments, writing about the final girl. For example, she suggests the gaze becomes at least for a while female, can't be permanently female, it becomes for a while female, stems from any transgression possible inside the slasher film, acting as a precursor to the restoration of the symbolic order, which itself symbolically restores the film to a categorizable place on the shelf of a local video library. The moment of restoration occurs exactly at the moment of the final girl's successful appropriation of the phallus, often represented by the knife in the slasher film. That tradition begins with Hitchcock and Psycho. Within Clover's psychoanalytic analysis, quote, "The moment at which the final girl is effectively phallicized is the moment that the plot halts and horror ceases. Day breaks and the community returns to its normal order." So nothing changed, and we just had a moment of fantasy where we thought change might be possible. All right, so Buffy. Let's watch some Buffy. Buffy the Vampire Slayer is a series that constantly negotiates female agency through the empowerment or disempowerment of its female performing protagonist. While Buffy is often presented as a superhero, showing exceptional powers and then with the responsibility of how to use those powers, so sort of standard superhero narrative, she is also occasionally presented as a final girl who must use her wits and resources to overcome masculine-coded killers, the vampires. The episode, almost always masculine-coded, I should say, but not always in Buffy. Like, there are female vampires that exist in that reality. Just there's always these scenes of her in the graveyard fighting the dude vampires, it seems like. This is a recurring joke in the series, actually, I think. The episode Helpless in season 3, directed by James A. Kuntner, is where this is most pronounced, because the protagonist has her superpowers taken away from her in this episode and must fight vampires without them. Not coincidentally, her masculine-coded characters, like friends, in the film, also abandon her in this moment, which is foreshadowed in the opening scenes of this episode. In her conversation with her situationship buddy Angel, notice how she constantly refers to her paternal figures such as Giles, and also references her father in a sexual undertone, and she does this with wisecracks, jokes. The scene with Angel is mirrored by her later fight with the vampire, which also has sexual references and where Buffy starts to understand that her powers are disappearing. Later in the episode, she will find out that Giles was the one poisoning her and acting as an instrument for the Watchers Council, which here is a stand-in for the patriarchal order that is threatening her. Let's take a look.
Right in the heart.
Satisfied?
I'm not sure that's the word.
Okay. I didn't mean satisfied like...
No, I wasn't trying to.
Because we're not having satisfaction in the personal sense.
Of course.
I should go. Giles.
Just waiting for you. I know.
Thanks for the workout.
Am I going to see you this weekend? You probably have plans.
Right. Birthday. Actually, I do have a thing.
Oh, thing. Date?
Nice attempt at casual. Actually, I do have a date. Older man. Very handsome. Likes it when I call him Daddy.
Your father. It is your father, right?
He's taking me to the ice show. It should be big fun. I could use a little fun.
This one?
Amethyst.
Used for?
Breath mints?
Charm bags, money spells, and for cleansing one's aura.
Okay, so how do you know if one's aura is dirty? Somebody come by with a finger and write "wash me" on it?
Buffy, I'm aware of your distaste at studying vibratory stones. But since it is part of your training, I would appreciate your glib-free attention.
Sorry. It's just with Faith on one of her unannounced walkabouts, I feel like somebody should be patrolling.
Now, Faith is not interested in proper training, so I must rely on you to keep up with yours.
I hate being the good one.
And as for patrolling, well, you'll be there soon enough. Why so anxious?
I guess to just have some energy to burn.
Well, in due time. But for the present, if it's not entirely beyond your capabilities, try to concentrate.
Well, that was really funny looking. Could you do it again?
I'll kill you for that.
For that? What were you trying to kill me for before? Okay, so here's the deal.
Join us right.
Great. I want to keep to time a little bit, so I'm going to move through the next part a little bit quicker, especially to respect the time of people that are physically here. I guess if you're at home watching me on your sofa, it's not such a big deal. But I'll skip through a little bit the next part. So I'm just discussing here some qualities of Buffy, that it's like, you know, also a dude creator, Joss Whedon, and it's happening in the 90s, sort of after these, after the main period of the slasher film has kind of already happened. So it's sort of almost a post-slasher TV series, Buffy, I would say. Yeah, so you can read it as a kind of neo-slasher, and then it's possible to see it as not so impactful in terms of these gender relations. So I want to look for some emancipatory potential in a different way. Looking at the popularity of Final Girl aesthetics today, and especially the appropriation of masculine codes. Returning to the teenage male audience of the Final Girl, let's accept her challenges, that Clover's challenges, that the Final Girl is just a tool for young boys needing an outlet for expression of sexual paranoia. This leaves an automatic question. If you so readily dismiss the subjectivity of the Final Girl's own story, even if this is an imagined subjectivity, can we reimagine it? By just seeing her as a tool for male sexual paranoia, you take away an opportunity for identification with her even imagined psychological journey. You could say that's what Buffy, the TV series, is, actually. If we view the killer as patriarchy manifesting its worst features, monstrous violence, locker room talk, abusers, masculine image, decoupled from kind of social bonds that keep it under control, then the Final Girl's own journey is against terror and paralysis inside this apparition, or her fear of it, that constantly brings it to life, which happens even through his non-presence. There the real behavioral control mechanism can truly lie. For how often in the slasher film is the killer at first a stalker, manifesting selectively in the Final Girl's real world, almost as a romantic lover would do, watching her, for example, leaving clues around the house and then silently closing the argument by drawing circles around her. So we'll look at, this happens also a little bit in the Weepy, which will be the subject of next week, but obviously the Weepy doesn't feature a killer, but it does feature often this character of the man returning from war, who is like an estranged man who the woman has to like try and work out if he's, you know, psychologically okay or not through the trauma. So that's a post-World War II film. And the slasher is a post-Vietnam War phenomenon coming out of the United States. So they're both sort of post-war subgenres. This slight rereading that I'm proposing also offers something different to the slasher film's teenage male audiences. Rather than using the Final Girl as a tool to manifest their own curtailed desire, she can become a moment of self-reflection on the vicious nature of patriarchy and their own participation within it. Who of any audience actually celebrates the killer of the slasher film, for example? Who actually loves it when he kills violently someone for having sex, or even a dude for being incompetent? We might celebrate and get some sadomasochistic masochistic pleasure from special effects of a really gory killing, but it's for the Final Girl that we reserve our sense of celebration and from which we draw our actual rewards. But the key to this argument and its main flaw, I claim, will always come down to one thing: the expression and punishment of female desire, and especially its perversion, which is at stake in the slasher film. This is something I talked about a few times over this lecture. So the slasher film continually insists on the virginity of the final girl and her friends, not her friends, but her, that she's not allowed any transgressions in this way, and if she does, she's going to die, which is an odd survival criteria, actually, and as various feminists and queer feminist theorists have pointed out, it sits perfectly inside a patriarchal impulse to control women's sexual behavior, and especially to locate it inside specific modes of heterosexuality, even if it doesn't fit those. So this is a key side of its control, and one I'll return to in week 3 when I look at the online misogynists. So when looking at Buffy, she still contains these limitations, I think, on her sense of perversion. She's still kind of like, she has autonomy, but she's sort of limited in her like sexual range and things that she can do. So what about a final girl who fucks with these things a little bit more and actually expresses some dark feminine perversion? What happens then? The music video for the Billie Eilish song Bad Guy is shot by the director Dave Meyers, who mainly works in advertising. The music video depicts various tropes of the horror genre, more generally than slasher specifically. Eilish is seen crawling backwards, as in The Exorcist of the 1970s, riding children's bikes like in The Shining, if you know that film, bleeding from the mouth, having severed heads in plastic bags. That reminded me of that, what's the Jennifer Lopez, The Cell? Anyone see The Cell? That film from 2002, I think. And appropriating various tools like snorkels. What's she up to in this crazy lair of hers? The message of Bad Guy is pretty clear and also contained in its title. I am not your victim, I'm the villain. I will sleep with your father if I want. I will later cut off his head, and what's more, I'll make him like it. Her line of, I am a young girl sent to destroy you, not a direct quote, is a threat to the patriarchal control of women's sexual behavior. It's perverted, creepy, villainous, and destructive, and therein lies its power and its resistance. Let's watch a little bit of Bad Guy.
My Invisalign has...
I have taken out my Invisalign.
I have taken out my Invisalign, and this is the album.
White shirt, now red, my bloody nose sleeping. You're on your tippy toes, creeping around like no one knows. Think you're so criminal. Bruises on both my knees for you. Don't say thank you. Oh please, I do what I want when I'm wanting to. My soul so cynical. So you're a tough guy, like you're really rough guy. Just can't get enough guy, just always so puff guy. I'm that bad type, make your mama sad type, make your girlfriend mad type, might seduce your dad type. I'm the bad guy. Duh. I like it when you take control, even if you know that you don't own me. I'll let you play the role, I'll be your animal. My mommy likes to sing along with me, but she won't sing this song if she reads all the lyrics. She'll pity the men I know. So you're a tough guy, like you're really rough guy. Just can't get enough guy, just always so puff guy. I'm that bad type, make your mama sad type, make your Guess you're that type. I'm the bad guy.
Duh.
I like when you get mad. I guess I'm pretty glad that you're alone. You said she's scared of me? I mean, I don't see what she sees, but maybe it's 'cause I'm wearing your cologne.
All right, so I'll skip through a little bit more. Bad Guy, I think, is nice. Bad Guy is nice. I like Bad Guy. It doesn't tell a story about how women can do anything, some superpower stories. It just tells a dark internal story about perversion and talks to patriarchy like, I'll decide, and if you're threatened, then this is your problem. And I think that's cool. We can talk about, does it still address patriarchy? Is it still a problem? And whether something more emancipatory would be something more internal that actually just goes into, this more internal type of perversion and doesn't bother with the male gaze at all, or doesn't bother with patriarchy at all. So, skipping ahead, while I accept Clover's arguments regarding the inescapability of the male gaze and also Mulvey's about the patriarchal apparatus, there does seem to be good reason to continue our focus on the final girl and what emancipatory properties she might potentially have. These seem to rest on the question of female perversion and its expression, even if this is like not allowed in patriarchy. If the slasher film does indeed present an internal conversation about masculinity, then there seems also to be a legitimate case for an anti-patriarchy conversation that re-examines her as a figure of challenge for the monstrous nature of masculinity and a means of negotiating our participation within that, even as non-male viewers, and specifically in which the expression of female sexualities continues to be repressed and contained by what is allowed, disallowed under patriarchy. Clover hints in 1992 at more work to be done in this area. Quoting her, "One is deeply reluctant to make a progressive claim for a body of cinema as spectacularly nasty towards women as the slasher film is, but the fact is that the slasher does, in its own perverse way, and for better or worse, constitute a visible adjustment in the terms of gender representation." So some optimism in some not specific way. All right, look forward to answer your questions that you have in the chat and here live. Thank you very much for your attention this evening. Thank you. So go ahead. Does someone want to, we have this microphone here. Someone want to take that for me? One of you guys in the front. Yeah, thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah. You can speak closer. I can, of course.
Yeah, any questions, fine, by the way. I'm conscious that this is for a general public and not everyone has specific knowledge about slasher film. So like any comment is actually cool. Like it's very open, this 10 minutes. Yeah.
So you mentioned that also the killer
has some, if I understood correctly, also the killer has some female characteristic that get attached to him. So can you just talk about that a bit, describe it a bit? Because
Yeah.
it wasn't very clear to me.
Yeah, it's not clear to me either. That's partly why I left it out of the talk. And honestly, it's a bit more of a problematic analysis within like Clover's. I find it a problematic part of Clover's analysis. She talks about it, like I can summarize it. She talks about it as something like, I did go into it a little bit, this over-attachment with the mother, over-attachment with the father, with the other family members. Some of these types of like fixation qualities, and then like also like, I don't know, she doesn't use the word submission, but it gives a vibe, something like submission, which I think these are quite like hard things to attach to femininity. Like even if you're critiquing them, they're sort of like, yeah, I found that like, you know, I find that part of her analysis hard to read. So that's why I didn't really like include it. Yeah, because it sort of gives also, I don't know, this idea of the killer having this masculine and feminine mix is sort of a bit, I don't know. I get it with the final girl. With the killer, I'm just like a bit like, yeah, a bit confused by it. And also like, it sort of fits with this also, what's the term she uses? Gender confusion or gender crisis or something like this. This is also a really, you know, hard way to write that. I get what she's talking about, that this is something that comes up over and over again. But these are the parts where her analysis is like a bit, yeah, hard to talk about. Or I chose to just sort of take those parts out because I also think they're not central to her argument so much. But that's my answer is like, yeah, it's sort of about, yeah, about a fixation and a kind of like familial attachment. Yeah. Whereas the final girl exhibits these independence, qualities of independence and autonomy. It's not really pictured together with family, for example, and sort of has this like, you know, freedom, autonomy. But the killer is still living in the past from some deep traumatic memory of something that happened with their mother, or like Norman Bates in Psycho, or, you know, something like this. But calling this a feminine quality is like, you know, hardcore. Yeah.
And this book, when was it published?
1992.
92. Yeah. And can you give a bit more of a background on Clover herself, if you know?
Not really. No, you know, this is what she's famous for.
This particular book, yeah?
Yeah. Okay. But she did continue in, you know, as a scholar and specific in film theory and gender studies in film theory. So, you know, leading some book publications that were compendiums of different authors and stuff around film and gender. But also like, she's from this school in the 80s and 90s of like all about the gaze and how the film is like constructing a particular reality through its use of film language, which includes like Richard Dyer and some of these other, Laura Mulvey I mentioned as well. Yeah, they are all kind of trying to deeply analyze film language and look at and deconstruct the political story that it's telling by even by its camera angles or the apparatus itself. Yeah. Still alive, Carol Clover, I think in New York, teaching in New York. Not so much writing and publication happening now. Yeah.
Cool, thanks.
Oh, cool.
Hey, привіт. You mentioned that the subgenre of slasher films appeared after Vietnam War. But can you explain a little bit more why the slasher films actually, why this subgenre people connected to the Vietnam War? Is it actually connected somehow or not?
Yeah, the quick answer is, but I'm curious about, yeah, what's your experience of the slasher and so on? Is it a genre that's totally new to you, by the way? Can I just like ask this? Yeah.
I don't know, like if you can consider any horror film slasher. I mean, I was watching horror movies, but I don't know if they were like slashers. So, can you name characteristics of slasher?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
It has this, especially this A to Z
Yeah.
plot structure.
Uh-huh.
It's just like you get the killer's backstory, and then
yeah.
murder 1 happens, murder 2 happens,
Uh-huh.
murder 3 happens, murder 4 happens.
Yeah, thanks.
However many.
I
and
think
then
there were-
final girl, and
yeah.
then final battle, and then
I think it was the Scream thing.
Yeah.
Scream movie. Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Scream is a slasher, but a self-referential slasher that's kind of a slasher about slashers. So it's Wes Craven trying to also work with and undo some of the tropes. So, for example, that character Sydney is I think still the only female character, the only final girl who has sex and still survives for the duration of the film. To answer your first question, so some suggestion about this is that it's to do with spectacularity of violence, and Vietnam War was an important military conflict for war journalism, where there was a lot of photography of violence that was previously censored, also under the Hays Code, I think, in cinema, was censored and then suddenly was exposed by newspapers and so on. So you get also new Hollywood films like Raging Bull or Taxi Driver or something that are like hyper-violent in this period of the 1970s. Slasher is like emerging, at the same time, and you can see how like it might be connected with this, because Psycho happens in 1964, and then it's 10 years before Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So, normally you get a catalyst film, and then immediately you get a lot of copycats, copycats is a term for a serial killer, like being copied. But you get copycats of the first film happening almost immediately. But in the case of Psycho and other slasher films, it takes 10 years. So something changed. Probably it's connected with United States participation in the Vietnam War and the specific documentation of violence that happened around that. And that's an interesting thing to like connect and contemplate, how there is this connection between violent representation in media and how it plays out in different genres or subgenres of cinema. Yeah.
Дякую.
Будь ласка.
Hello.
Oh.
You mentioned that the knife was a phallic symbol. Would you think would be like a feminine yonic symbol of like a weapon?
Yeah, well, thank you for your question. All of your questions, actually. It also connects with previous question in a way. Why doesn't the killer use yonic symbols if the final girl is like appropriating the phallus? Because it's not a thing that the killer does that, as far as I know. What would be a yonic symbol? Yeah, I mean, do you have suggestions? Like, I think it's a nice question. If we were going to make the female killer, what yonic symbols does she employ? And maybe there's some in, I'm trying to think about Bad Guy, sorry. And whether she sort of, I mean, she has this milk pouring thing that she does, which is sort of like you could say that's like a maternal sort of like, it's a guy lying dead on the floor, and she pours milk into his mouth in this like surrealistic background. You could say that that's a kind of like, yeah, Ionic symbol, I guess, that it's sort of like referring to, psychoanalysis is not my thing, it's not my thing, but it's like referring to the, you know, feminine lactation capacity and fucking like then using this to destroy someone or suggesting that it's diet. I don't know, like, this is my best
Maybe something
answer.
like Iron Maiden.
Something like what?
Like an Iron Maiden.
Iron Maiden. Yeah, so the suggestion is Iron Maiden torture device. Okay, in what sense? Enclosure, something like this? Or?
Yeah. Trapping. Going back to the womb in a way.
I think that like typical.
Encourage you to use the mic if you can, so that people can hear. Just so that people can hear what you're saying.
I think that the typical female weapon of murder in like media discourse is poison. Is usually, I don't know, for me it's like really big association. I also remember the Lady Gaga's clip Paparazzi, where in the end she kills her lover who tried to kill her with poison. And I don't know, it's stuck in my memory because I was 9 years old when I watched it. And then I start to notice that in a lot of films, poison is actually like a kind of a female, let's say it like this, method of murder. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, how would you want to kill someone? Like, I'm kind of curious, and you know, we were talking about that there's an exhibition in the building at the moment about people who've killed their husbands, abuse survivors who killed their husbands and then went to jail. That's happening in Fluggraben now, so yeah, you know, it's also kind of like, yeah, I mean, I don't really have like great answers. I think these contributions are nice. I'm not familiar with the Lady Gaga thing. Poison as a tool for women's revenge, I would say, is like a specific theme in ancient Greek drama. And I'm trying to think of a specific play, but I just know this exists, and in Greek mythology, but I can't remember like exact examples. Maybe someone from the audience can, but yeah. And then the Lady Gaga, I think maybe she's referring to that. I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's the nice clip. I highly recommend.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, thanks. I'll check it out. Traumatizing. Okay.
Yeah, I remember it from my childhood. Oh yeah.
I'm still getting over the meat with the meat, like sewing meat on herself. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great conversation, because also the final girl is a defensive archetype, and really what's threatening, as well as I suggest, you know, perverted female sexuality. Another thing that's threatening is like aggression, you know, not something defensive, but yeah, active. Well, sorry, in the case of the exhibition, you could argue it is defensive, as people are abused. But yeah, you know, aggression is another taboo. So yeah, I mean, yeah, it's talked about aliens, but Carol Clover discusses aliens, and that's an example of a, you know, action plot that's like sci-fi action film, and yeah, but those examples of like, you know, female action stars are also not really, you know, so prevalent, because that's an example of like a film genre that works in like a more aggressive sense of agency, where it's like, you know, I'm active and I'm going to go in and change this situation, not, you know, I'm trying to protect my family, or I'm, you know, behaving more defensively. So yeah, I don't know, like maybe G.I. Jane, that Demi Moore film, but I've never seen that, but just that the figure of that is maybe one that's like more aggressive. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a cool line of discussion. Yeah. Because you got something to say about female perversion, sexual perversion?
Well, yes. Some of the speculations on the topic of weapons, I would say, like, if we distinguish two plot possibilities, one when it is more something like defensive, then something very classical, I would say, will be some or kitchen instrumentary, or just something from house, like pens or so. It's like just I would say a stereotype, so to say. And in more attacking sense of view, it's something that requires not a brute force, but rather precision and skill, so to say. Poison is a nice example, or some perhaps needles or so. Perhaps it's also sends us to the it's something that it's totally outside of slasher genre, I believe, but rather to something from Japan, when it was kind of an archetype of like a geisha who also could kill someone, and it was kind of like quite often. And when she did that, she did it mostly with some tools that are hidden within like her robes or hair, which is more open, with some like needles or stuff. I'm not sure how to say that, like something that the one can hide in hair. Yeah, so it's overall it's something that requires not brute force but precision, and yeah, that's all.
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with geisha traditions, but I understand it to be a type of sex slavery in a way, or bonded relationship, where, not relationship's the wrong word, bonded sexual labor. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me that they had these methods of killing, but yeah, it's good to. Yeah.
Well, it could be methods of killing. It could be also like methods of hire an assassin, like to kill someone. Like overall, it's just important to hide and to yes, it's something more about the precision and to be like. To make all the actions in a precise way, well skilled, and it's not something about just brute force, like toss the knife and or just like hit someone. Yeah. So the overall style of that is like something about even sophistication, so to say. And it could be also described as some kind of stereotypical type, like when perhaps, so to say, men are like brute and straightforward, then women are like something of sophistication and precision. When it's actually more attached to the femme fatale archetype. So, yes.
Yeah, thank you for that. Actually, watching Kill Bill the other day, and that's, there's, you know, Kill Bill is like, in some ways, not super progressive, I think. But there is this nice scene I was thinking about where one of the No, it's Oren Ishii when she's younger, attacking the boss. I forget the guy's name, but she kills the guy by as a 14-year-old by having sex with him, and then when he reaches orgasm, at that moment, you know, cutting his dick off, I think, or something like this, and then ripping out his neck, something. Which is like a great, also, you know, mix of like sexual perversion and a revenge in that case for killing her whole family. Yeah, so that's maybe a nice example as well. Maybe last comment, if there's anything else in the chat, you know, I'm curious to read something, but yeah, last comment from the audience here, and then I think we can have a drink and maybe the last of the soup. Yeah.
Well, I have one more question about you. As from your words, I understand that teenagers teenagers were watching a lot of movies in 1980s. And what would girls do at this time?
Yeah, again, thank you for the question. Carol Clover always talks about this teenage boys audience for the slasher film. And I'm not 100% sure about it, honestly. Yeah, I think it's a visible thing. Like, teenage boys were more performative about their watching of slasher films, but she never refers to the statistics about that. It says, like, you know, slasher film is 85% male audience or something. She never specifically says that. So I always have this question when I'm reading Men, Women and Chainsaws, how real that is. It wouldn't surprise me, I guess, like, these narratives are maybe just not so interesting to audiences that identify as women. Maybe, but some probably, yeah. And like, you know, there might be some in the 70s and 80s that really see emancipatory potential in the final girl, and, you know, even in the killer in some ways, if you look at bad guy as a kind of a perverse identification with the villain. Maybe, you know, Billie Eilish is like a really big slasher film fan. What were teenage girls doing in the 1970s and 1980s? Yeah, I do think that they were seeing films. I'm trying to like think in my brain what types of films were like popular for female audiences in that period, but this is just outside my specialized area, I think. Yeah, like I actually just don't know, and I think it's a good question, and I wouldn't be surprised if they were seeing slasher films. Like, this teenage male audience assumption does jump out at me as something that's like, I would like to see evidence of that, you know, if that's true. Yeah, that's my best answer, and good question again, like good questions from everyone actually. Yeah. I mean, do you have a proposal there, or what you think it might be? Or actually another audience member has a proposal?
I think that maybe, like, as I understood what Clover was saying, like from your words, I'm not sure what Clover was really saying, that teenage males, it's the audience that was addressed, but that doesn't mean that it was really the audience, you know? It's like we can read from the films possibly that it was addressed to this type of audience, but it doesn't mean that it was this audience.
Yeah, it's an imagined viewer. I understand what you mean. I can say confidently that no, she talks specifically about teenage boy audiences. This is a film made for teenage males, she says really specifically. So I would like it better if it was more like what you say, but no, she's really saying it's like this. I did have a thought, which is like, this is also Nixon era in the 1970s. So this era in the United States of like law and order and like coming after the sexual liberation of the 1960s. So I think like women's rights in general in this period is like contracting, you know, in the United States, as I understand. So it's like a backlash or a knee-jerk reaction to too much freedom in the 1960s. So it's like, I don't know how that affects cinema audiences, for example. You might get like less female audiences going in cinemas because, you know, parents are overly protective and won't let them go out at night, stuff like this, because there's this paranoia and this fear of crime around the cities. That kind of thing wouldn't surprise me because that's the social condition of the 1970s. And you don't yet have widespread movie rentals in home, you know, in this period of 70s. That starts sort of late 70s, early 80s. Very important for the slasher film, but in that early period of 1970s, it doesn't exist. So if you're going to go out to see a film as a woman or someone that performs as a woman in the 1970s, you might go to the drive-in cinema on a date, something like this. You wouldn't necessarily be able like, unless you really fight or something, be like permitted to go by yourself or in a group of female friends. So maybe that's part of the logic, actually, of why, if it was teenage boys watching these types of films, why that happened in that way, or why they were an imagined audience also. Does that answer that a little bit? I'm not trying to say that's a good thing, by the way, just to be really clear. Great. Thank you very much for joining everyone that's here and also like on the live stream. Didn't get any questions that I need to deal with in the chat. That's fantastic. But thank you for your participation in this live stream event. Next week it's Weepies and melodrama and pornography and Laura Mulvey. See you then, and thank you very much. Okay. Woo!